has anyone had financial advice here before? Anyone seen a financial advisor? Okay, excellent. So if anyone's ever been to a financial advisor or a planner before, you'll know they ask you heaps of questions, heaps. What's your personal situation? What's your age? How much money have you got? Where is it? What are you doing with it? Those things all affect the advice you'll be given, because there is no such thing as one size fits all financial advice, okay? So I can't tell you exactly what to do in your situation tonight. All I can do is give you some general guidance, give you some suggestions, talk about some general principles, but I can't tell you, hey, you should go buy property X over there, or hey, you should buy this share, because I don't know your situation. And there's no way I could get into that tonight, okay? So this is general advice, general education. Please, if you are curious about how it would affect you personally and your situation, if you're hearing that advice and going, oh, I'm interested in that, but I don't know how it works for me, please do go and see a financial advisor or planner. And one of the great tricks with this is you can get a 45-minute session usually with most planners for free. They call it a discovery session. You could go and see several planners and advisors and ask your very detailed questions about your very detailed personal situation and not have to pay for it. There's also financial counsellors if you're in a tricky situation, if you've got a problem with debt or something like that. So don't feel like you've got to go out and pay an advisor a lot of money to get advice on this. You can probably go and get some of it, just through a discovery session if you hear something tonight and you want to know how it fits in your situation. I do not endorse any particular financial institution or any financial product. I am agnostic about types of investment. You might hear certain people who are committed to, oh, I like property but not shares, or the other way round, or I like bonds and I don't touch anything else, or I have everything in cash. I'm agnostic. I think they can all work, okay? It's about you understanding how your mindset works and what your personal situation is and what's going to work for you. I definitely don't endorse any particular financial institution. I happen to have the opinion that banks are the nexus of evil. And yes, they're a tool that we need to use, but we need to use them very wisely, and we need to be very aware as consumers about what we're using them for. Otherwise, they can take advantage of us. And that's why we have a Royal Commission at the moment, because they don't behave necessarily in the interest of their customer above their dividends and their bottom line. So any questions on that? Anyone confused about what that means? No? Okay. So, what is financial independence? Has anyone heard the term financial independence before? Yeah? Okay. Anyone want to volunteer what it means for them? What would financial independence mean for you? Okay.
You comfortably earn enough to look after yourself and probably aren't sinking debt.
Yep, good point. Anyone else?
You're earning more than you're spending.
Earning more than you're spending, definitely. Yep. Anything else?
You can live comfortably the rest of your life without having to worry about being able to adult properly?
Adulting properly, yeah. I'm 36 and I feel like I still haven't got there. I don't know if you ever feel like you're adulting properly. Such a good point. Not worrying, not stressing, right? That's a big part of it. Money is just a means to an end, right? Once you get to a certain level of money, it's still the same blue smarties is the quote that you hear from Bill Gates. He's like, once you get to a certain amount, it doesn't really matter anymore. There's only so much that money can do for you. It's the thing that money does do is give you choice and give you independence. It allows you to do what you want to do with your time. It means you don't have to rely on somebody else, whether that's a husband or wife, boyfriend or girlfriend, mum or dad, the government, whoever you would normally have to go to get money. Imagine not having to ask other people for money or rely on other people for money, right? That's what independence is. And that includes eventually, I hope for all of you that you'll get to this point, not having to work to earn money. If you do this right, there will come a point in your life when work becomes an option, not something that you absolutely have to do. And that's what we're working towards. The point is then not to not work. We need you to work, but we need you to work on something that you're passionate about, that you really care about, a problem that you want to solve, not just doing a job because you need the money, okay? And for me, financial independence gives you that. It means you're earning money from your assets, not from your time. Your assets pay you, and then you can work on what you want to work on, and you don't have to worry so much about how much you can earn doing that particular work. Make sense? That's what I'm going to talk about tonight. Now, this is the benefit of like 19 years of me thinking about this. I started thinking about it when I was about 17 years old. So I wish someone had condensed it for me when I was 17. It's taken me a long time to get to this point. Probably about 8 or 9 years ago is when I really got this concept. But if it's new for you, there's lots of information out there, okay? You don't have to rush in and have the answers straight away. And what I want to give you today is a bit of context, some framework, and a way to think about it, so that then you know what kind of information you're going for. Make sense? Okay? So why should you care about financial independence? I mean, you guys are young, right? I think most people here are younger than me. You've got your whole life ahead of you. You're able to earn an income. Why should you care? Why would you think about it now? Okay? I'm going to give you my 5 reasons. The first 4 are all the big sticks, the things that can go wrong. First of all, shit happens. It does. It happens a lot. Your car breaks down. You lose your job. You break your leg. Your partner leaves you. You sign up for some debt that you didn't understand, and all of a sudden you're looking at going bankrupt. The ATO sends you a bill that you didn't expect. Who knows? Anything can happen. These things do happen. If you don't have some money set aside, you will have to go into debt to get out of that situation. That's when people start using credit cards, payday loans, going to the bank and asking for personal loans, all these forms of what I would call bad debt that are like a burden around your neck, and they are hard to get away from once you've started. Having a buffer of savings, an account that can get you through an emergency, one of those things, whether it's a few weeks of living costs, ideally a few months eventually, that kind of stuff will mean that when this stuff does happen, you can get through it without having to go into debt. And that's one of the biggest reasons that you need this. Regardless of whether you're aspiring to be financially independent or not, or whether you just want to not be living pay to pay and freaking out if something goes wrong, you definitely need a buffer fund, okay, to get you through these humps. The other reason is work. Now you guys, who's in the gig economy here? Anyone? Who's doing like part-time work for multiple employers? Not yet? Kind of, yeah? Okay, so who's heard the phrase the gig economy? Yeah? Okay. Does everyone know what the gig economy means? Okay, so in the past, so let's talk about great-grandparents for you guys. They would have gotten a job with a company, done an apprenticeship, probably out of school, stayed with the company for 40 or 50 years, got a pension plan, retired on the pension from the company, okay? And then your grandparents came along and they had a similar level of security in terms of the companies would, you know, employ you for a long period of time, but the pension plans disappeared. And so we have a government pension scheme now. It then became normal for people to change jobs regularly, right? So instead of having one career, one job that you do for your whole life, you might have 2 or 3 careers. Now, you guys are looking at possibly having like 15 different types of jobs in your life. 15 discrete types of jobs. That's a lot, right? If you think about your working life, might be like 50 years, you're only going to get a few years per job. Very hard to build up enough skill or enough experience in one particular profession that allows you to progress. And what's happening more and more is instead of going and getting a job with one company and them looking after you, they want you to contract in now. So they want you to take on all the risk. They want you to take on your insurance and your superannuation, your workers' compensation, all those things that can go wrong that used to have companies paying for. We used to have them paying annual leave and sick leave and all that kind of stuff. The odds are that you'll probably have to look after a lot of that yourself because they'll expect you to subcontract in. And that means you end up having multiple employers who are actually clients, right? You become a mini business, even if it's just you by yourself. And you're taking on all that risk. So your costs actually go up because you have to insure yourself. You have to cover yourself when you want to have leave, whether it's sick leave or annual leave. And the gig economy refers to the fact that you'll have lots of discrete projects. Rather than having one job that you stick in for several years, you'll probably have lots of clients and you'll chop and change between different projects. So if you're a graphic designer, you might have 5 different companies that you do graphic design for. Each of them is like a gig, okay? So that's what they talk about with the gig economy. It's this move from going to steady employment, which we used to have, where people used to stay with companies for years and they'd look after you and you're like the family, to now you guys get to take on all the risk and you'll probably be juggling lots of people at the same time. Work is really changing, right? The odds of you guys getting a permanent, steady job that you stay in for several years is quite low now, even compared to when I came out of school, only 18 or 19 years ago, right? It's a big deal. And the fact that you've got to take on all that risk means that you have to be money savvy and you have to be a smart business person, even if it's just you, because you're effectively running your own business when you do that. And hopefully you don't end up like this kid. I'm sure you won't. But having that idea of being entrepreneurial is just going to be inherent in most people's roles now. We're going to have to think like that. We're going to have to behave like that. So that's reason number 2. Reason number 3, I think, is something that's very underrated. We don't talk about it a lot. This graph is from the 2015 Intergenerational Report. So this is a report that the government puts together. It's supposed to be non-partisan. They're supposed to not put any of their political agenda in there. So the front half has got lots of fantastic data, and then now they do slot a lot of their political agenda in the back end. The point that I think you guys need to care about, in 1975, for every person over 65 years old, which was the retirement age, we had 7.3 people earning a wage. So 7.3 people paying tax that funded a pension for that retired person. At the moment, it's 4.5 people per retired person. Now, we have an ageing population. The baby boomers are coming through. We're about to have a very high proportion of people going on to retirement pensions. 2.7 people paying tax per retired person. So our country, Australia, is the most reliant in the developed world on personal income tax to fund the government. Something like 50% of what funds the government comes from our wages. Okay? So if you've got fewer people working and having to pay pensions, do we think tax is going to go down? No. They also, because we have this ageing population, have increasing healthcare costs. So at the same time, at the moment, they're spending about $2,300 per person. They're going to have to spend over $6,000 per person by 2040. Okay? So the government needs more tax dollars from us to be able to fund all these people who are living longer and need more healthcare and need a pension. Okay? So that means we're not going to get a tax cut. We're probably not going to get as heavily subsidised as we have in the past. We're probably going to see less subsidy for our healthcare and for our pension and for any Centrelink support and that kind of stuff. That's why we have, I think we're 33rd out of 34th in the OECD for our pensions. The only country we beat is South Korea. Right? It's not going to get better. And actually, most of the people in this room probably won't have a pension, won't even be an option. You'll have to live on your super. So if you haven't planned for the future, you're going to be pretty sad by the time you get to that point. Okay? Finally, there's quite a few women in this room. Guess what? There's a vagina tax. It's called the pay gap and the superannuation retirement gap. So if you're a woman in this state at the moment, you're paid 24% less than a man for the same job. That compounds over time. You will retire with about half of what the male in the same job retires with. All right? So girls, we have to be ahead of the game.
And plus we have children and we start.
Lots and lots of reasons. There's lots of reasons. It starts from the very beginning. It starts from before you have children, before your aspirations are even known to the world, you will be paid less. It's extraordinary.
I think it's changing a bit now.
I hope so. But in the meantime, we've got to catch up. Okay? The impact of that, of course, is the compounding over time. It's the fact that you're paid a little bit less at the beginning. It seems like a tiny amount, but over time, over 40 years, it compounds up. And that's why we have this retirement gap. Okay? Big deal. Now, that's all the sad, depressing, horrible stuff. Okay? So if you're the sort of person that responds to the big sticks, hey, you need to do this because you're going to be in trouble, those are the things you want to think about. If you're the sort of person who needs positive motivation, here's the thing you need to think about. Time rich. Financial independence means you choose what you do with your time. Instead of having to go to work because you need an income on those Mondays when you don't feel like getting out of bed, or doing a job that you perhaps don't feel 100% supportive of, or struggling, you get to pick. It's just about choice. So you get to choose what kind of work you do. So I reached that point when I was about 31. So this is now my passion business. I do this because I love it, not because I have to. And it's a really wonderful, freeing thing because you can work on things like social enterprises and I don't have to care if I make a profit or not because I really care about the mission and I'm supported by my assets. Now, I started investing at 19, I got there at 31, 12 years. That might seem like a long time, but that time is going to pass anyway. It's going to pass. One day you'll be 36 too, okay? And if you start now, then maybe by the time you get to 36, you will be financially independent. And work will also be a choice for you. Now imagine doing that in your 30s instead of your 60s, which is when most people retire. Pretty cool, huh? Right? That's what we're aiming for. We're aiming to be masters of our own time. Because that's all money does. Money buys your time. You go and earn money so that you can have fun on the weekend, right? So that you can live where you want to live. So you can do the activities you want to do. That's the point of money. So that's why you need to be caring about it now. The sooner you care about it, the sooner you can get there. And you guys have got the ultimate advantage on your side. Karen and I would kill to be back in your age, because you've got time on your side. The compounding effect alone, have you guys heard the phrase, it's from Albert Einstein, compounding is the eighth most powerful force in the universe? The eighth wonder of the world, I think it is, most powerful force in the universe. Compounding is just over time, makes a big difference. You guys have got a head start against everybody who's older than you, okay? And that's why you should care about it now, because if you get on top of it now, then you won't have to worry about it when you get to the age that I'm at, or that your parents are at. Make sense? Okay. I'll tell you a little bit about my parents now. That's my mum and dad with the circles there, and that's me a few years ago with my 2 kids and my in-laws and my stepdad and all that fun stuff, and my husband. Now, my parents got divorced when I was 8, and my parents were both 40 at the time. And my mum was earning about $30,000 a year, and she had 2 small children, me and my sister, to look after. And my dad didn't pay child support. Back then, the rules weren't quite as stringent and the reporting wasn't quite as stringent, and he had his own company, and he used to put everything through his own company, every single dollar he spent, including all the chocolates that he bought for his girlfriends and roses and all that sort of stuff. So he's a bit sneaky. I love him dearly. He's a wonderful man, but he definitely didn't do the right thing with his money. So as a result, my mum was supporting 2 kids by herself, single parent, 8 and a 6-year-old. So we didn't have much money. I didn't know that we didn't have much money. I didn't actually really care. I didn't notice. Like, we used to go on a 1-week holiday. I lived in Brisbane. We used to go to the Gold Coast, 1-hour drive away for 1 week a year. That was our annual holiday. I didn't really notice that everybody else went other wonderful places, that kind of stuff. Because I was safe and I was loved and my parents looked after me, and my mum was a bit of a magician with the money. My dad, on the other hand, was a real spender. So he used to have flash clothes, jewellery, the $100,000 car, nice furniture, all that kind of stuff. He used to spend every dollar that he'd get. Meanwhile, my mum would be scrimping and saving to make sure that we all had shoes for school, that kind of stuff. Not that I really realised at the time. When I was about 17 and my mum was 49, she got interested in investing, and this is because she was an accountant. She had gone and done her bookkeeping course while I was a little kid, and then went on to do accounting, and she was working for people who invested, and she was like, this is really cool. We should learn about this. And so she started taking me along to investing seminars. And that's when I started thinking heavily about money. I'd been saving half of everything I ever earned since I was 10. But I didn't really know why money was important until I got a scholarship to a private girls' school. And I turned up, at this school, lucky to have second-hand clothing, and these girls were getting Porsches for their birthdays, stuff like that. It was ridiculous. And then I realised what money can do if you don't use it very wisely. But she started investing in shares when she was 49. Who here is older than 49? One. All right. So 49, okay? She bought $1,000 worth of shares for her first purchase. It took her ages to save that money. But that's when she started. She became financially independent when she was 64, okay?
So there's still hope.
There's still hope. There's hope for everybody, okay? But the point was, she never made a lot of money. I out-earned her my 3rd year out of university. I studied chemical engineering because I wanted a big pay packet. I wanted the money. I out-earned her within 3 years of coming out of university. It's not about how much she made. It's about how much she kept and what she did with it. Meanwhile, my dad was probably making like 150 to 200 grand a year. He's currently just coming out of bankruptcy. He lives on the pension. If his girlfriend kicks him out of her house, he will be homeless. He made millions over the course of the 25 years at the same time, right? Got nothing to show for it, nothing. Because it leaves his hand as quickly or faster than it comes in. It's not about how much you make, it's about how much you keep, okay? So growing up with parents like that, it's probably no surprise that I'm fascinated by financial education, right? And that I'm interested in this stuff. Because I've seen my dad have lots of money and completely cock it up. And my mum have not much money, but make it last. And now she's one of 4% of self-funded retirees in this country. The other 96% need some form of pension. She's one of the few that's self-funded. So the point of that is, exactly as you said, it's never too late. It's never too late, guys. It's not about how much you make, it is about how much you keep, okay? So if you take only one thing away, That's what I'd like you to take away from tonight. That's a bit about my story anyway. That's a bit about my parents' story. My story is I started investing when I was 19. So 17, started going to seminars. I'd been saving half of everything I earned since I was 10. And I earned a lot of money because I started working when I was 14, 12 hours a week minimum. I'd work 30 hours a week on the holidays and save half of every dollar that ever came in. So by the time I was, I think I was 18, I was in the beginning of my second year of university in engineering, and I was going to buy a car. I had all this money and I was like, I'm going to go buy an awesome car. I was going to buy a Toyota Sora. I know that's really wanky. I don't know if you guys know, so you guys probably don't even know what a Toyota Sora is, but that's okay. And my mum looked over my shoulder at my bank balance and went, oh, Lacey, that's the deposit on an apartment. I bought a little $100,000 apartment off the back of that comment. Took me 9 months to find it. It was the ugliest apartment you have ever seen in your life. It had brown carpet, brown brick walls and a brown ceiling. And I cried when I got the keys because I was so depressed at how ugly it was. I walked in and went, oh, it's horrible. But I saved $6,000 that holidays working as an engineer, as a student, and we replaced the carpets and we painted the ceiling and put in ceiling fans and things like that, and suddenly it looked nice. I still own that apartment. I kept buying. So I graduated from engineering, and every 2 years I bought another property. And then I got interested in shares when I was about 25 because my company that I worked for at the time, which was BHP Billiton, had a share scheme, so I started buying shares. I got interested in that. And I'm pretty cheap to run, right? I don't like things. I actually don't really care much about cars, it turns out. I've recently just upgraded my car and I nearly had a heart attack signing for a $13,000 car after having a $6,000 RAV4 for the last 6 years that I basically ran into the ground. I don't care for things. Things just don't do it for me. I like investing, it's fun, but I would rather spend money on experiences. I'll spend $30,000 on a big holiday, like a 3-month holiday overseas, rather than spending it on a car, because I think it's a waste. Sorry, were you going to ask a question then?
Do you think what you're doing is like you're looking at it as like a game or something?
I do treat it like a game now. It does come to a point when it's a game, but when it's your money, I don't know, this is a personal question for a lot of people. It depends on how your mindset works. Who here has gambled before? Anyone gambled? Lottery ticket, sweepstakes for football, races, yeah, most people have had a bit. You guys, I know technically you're too young. I don't like gambling. I would get more angry losing $100 than I would if I won $1,000. Like the relative happiness that I would have of that, I would be more angry losing the $100. So I don't gamble. Meanwhile, my mum loves to gamble, loves it. She thinks it's great fun. So she does treat it a bit more like that, but I take it very personally if I lose any money.
I'm very nerdy about it though. I have a limit. Once that's gone, it's gone. If I double it, I leave.
Yeah, and you treat it as entertainment rather than a money-making scheme? Well, then it's entertainment. It's the same as going to the movies or spending money on an app or, I don't know, buying a skateboard, right? Like if you treat it in the same way, then that's cool, it's entertainment. But yeah, so I started doing that, started putting a lot of money into shares and into property, paying down my debts, and then when I was 30 and pregnant with my first child, I was doing the maths and I was like, I'm earning about 40 grand a year from the rent from my properties, from the dividends from my shares and from the interest on my cash. And I'm pretty cheap to run, so I was like, actually, that's enough to cover my basic living costs. I don't have to go back to work if I don't want to. Pretty cool situation to be in when you're having your first child, right? Now, I hadn't actually thought about the impact that has, but when you have kids and you have to decide between staying at home with your kids, if you really want to. Some people would like to get out of the house, and after having my second child, I can understand why, when there are some kids that just, yeah, you need to get away from. I love him dearly, but man, he's full on. But it was a wonderful luxury to have the choice. I could pick whether I wanted to stay home or not. And if I go out and work, then I just plough all that extra money back into investing and it just makes more money for me. It breeds, right? Real luxury to have. Now, I think that my mum's story is the more inspiring, right? Because she's the one that did it tough, scrimped and saved. But I'm what happens when you teach your kids about money, okay? So you guys might be future parents one day. Teach your children about money and they can be exactly like me. You guys are still young enough that you can still be like that. But this is what happens when you teach your kids about saving and investing, okay? All right, enough of me prattling on about me. I'll wake up. There are only 2 rules to financial independence, only 2. Save and buy assets. That's it. They're the only 2 rules you have to remember, okay? The problem that we have is that people don't save because they think they'll save what's left over. They think, oh, okay, I got my $500 this week from my full-time job, right, after tax. I'm going to go spend the money on my rent, spend it on my car, I'm going to go buy my groceries, I'm going to do this. Oh, look, I've got $100 left in the bank. I might just, go out for a few drinks or go out for dinner. I might just buy that handbag that I've been looking at. Oh, there's nothing left to save. Damn. If you leave it till last, it will always go. Human nature is that we want to push ourselves to our limit, right? So if you've got $500 in the bank, your brain wants you to go and spend it. And the reason for that is dopamine. You actually get a little hit. It's the same as taking a drug. Exactly the same. You get a little hit of dopamine every time you spend money, right? You know that high that you get? You go, oh, that was exciting. Then you get home and you go, why did I buy that? That's ridiculous. Buyer's regret, right? It's an addiction. Spending is an addiction. And your brain is conspiring against you. It wants you to go and spend because it gets a hit of dopamine and it really likes it. It really enjoys it. Just how we are. So the trick with saving is to do it first. Don't do it last. Don't save what's left over. Save first. Pay yourself first. Think of it as paying yourself first. If you pay everybody else, you've paid the shopkeeper, you've paid the person who makes whatever clothes you're buying, you're paying the people who make the petrol, whatever it is, you've paid everybody else except yourself. You will need that money one day. You need to pay yourself first, okay? You have to save. The reason you have to save, we talked about before. You need something to get you through emergencies, a buffer fund if you like. You need something to make sure that if an emergency comes up, you don't have to go into debt to get through it, and they will come up. You can't control it. Some of them you can reduce the impact of by having things like insurance or a plan or, that kind of thing. But they will happen. Emergencies will happen. And you have to be able to get through them without going into bad debt. Because once you go into bad debt, it is very hard to get out. And at the very least, you'll be paying more than the thing should have cost in the first place when you pay interest on it. Okay? We'll talk a little bit more about debt later. So my advice with saving. Set an ambitious target. Okay? So none of this 10% crap. Okay? 20 at least. 20%. Every dollar that hits your pocket, 20 cents of it should go into a savings account, at least. The Olympic gold medalists for saving save over 70% of their income. Seriously, for every dollar that hits their pocket, they save 70 cents and live on the remaining 30. There are people that do that all over the world and become independent that way, saving really ambitiously. Now, the reason why you should have an ambitious savings target is because if it's in savings, you can get it back. If you're at the point where you're going to be eating baked beans for the rest of the month, and you really need some of that savings, you can go and get it. If you've spent it, it's gone. It's gone for good. So save first. Save ambitiously. Like I said, I've saved half of everything I've ever earned since I was 10. It's just a habit now. Every dollar that comes in, half of it's gone. Now, what you can do with your savings account is put it somewhere where it's not linked to an online transaction account. So you can actually say to your bank, whichever bank it is, take it off my net banking system. I don't want to see it. So you can't see the balance. Then you can't transfer out of it. You can transfer into it, but you can't transfer out of it. Don't connect it to a credit card. Don't connect it to any kind of transaction card. Have it isolated. So you physically have to go into the bank if you want the money. And what that will do is if you're going to make an impulse spend and you've got to go into a bank and sign a form, it just gives you a short circuit. It gives you a moment to think about what you're about to go and spend that money on and decide if it's really worth it. But if you really need the money, you can get to it. You just have to plan. Make sense? So a savings account that you cannot get to, isolated from everything else, make it hard to get to, make it so that you have to go physically into a bank to get it, and then just do it first. So if you know your pay is hitting your account on the first day of the month, have an automatic transfer set up that whisks away a percentage of it, whether it's, say you're getting paid $500 a week, and you say, oh, I'm going to save $200 of that. That'd be ambitious, right? 40%. Have that automatic transfer set up so that the money whisks away and you never see it. Or if you do have a salaried job, there are places where you can, and certainly I've had this with an experience with an employer, if you've got one of those kinds of jobs, where they will actually pay you into multiple accounts. You can nominate X% of your pay or this amount of your pay to go into account A and this amount to go into account B. And then you never even see it. You don't even have to think about it. Make it so that you don't have to think about it. Make it so you set it up once, and it just happens, and then you don't worry about it, right? And then you live on what's left. Because basically budgets suck, okay? Who's done a budget before? Did you stick with it? Kind of, yeah. Not really? No? Did you guys stick with yours when you did them? No? Yes?
Like 50-50.
50-50?
Sometimes I was too ambitious.
Yeah, well, that can happen. But what I notice a lot is that people write a very ambitious budget and then they put it in a drawer and don't look at it, right? Because it's too hard to maintain. And personally, I don't like budgeting. I think it's boring. I can think of many better things to do with my time. All I do is budget by bank balance. If there's money in my bank, I can spend it. If there's not money in my spending account, I don't get to spend any money. I have to decide if I want to go and get my savings out. Okay, so you don't have to make it complicated. You don't have to make it administratively burdensome. You can simply just say, well, this is what's left over. I'm going to try and live with that and see how far you go. And if in week 4 of your pay month you go, I was a little bit too ambitious, then you go and get the money out of the bank, out of your savings account. You physically go in and sign a piece of paper. But you make yourself have to do that part rather than I'm going to save what's left over. That is my foolproof plan for savings. Sorry? Well, you can have any account that you like. Yeah. So there's lots of different types of accounts you can get online, right? So you can apply for accounts. There are transaction accounts that generally don't pay any interest, right? They pay really low interest. Your savings account should pay you interest. Now, the interest rate you're going to get at the moment is pretty low. It's probably only going to be 2 to 2.5% if you're lucky. Unless you put it into like a term deposit, which means you've locked the money up and then you can't just go into the bank and sign for it unless you want to take a penalty on the interest. But you should be looking for an account that is an interest-bearing account. Well, some of them are. Each bank is different. So it's worth shopping around for this, right? There's so many competitors now. It's not just the big 4. There's lots of different banks. But what you don't want, I recommend not getting one of those accounts that says, oh, you've got to have a certain amount transferred each month, because then you've got to remember to transfer, right? If you haven't got it set up, or if you have a month when you're not earning, you miss out on the interest. There are accounts that will just pay the interest based on the fact that you've got a balance in there and that it's going up. So shop around, have a look. All you need to do then is just tell that bank, I don't want it listed. Like you might have to call them or you might have to go into a branch and say, I just don't want it to appear on my net banking.
Or you can have it with a different institution altogether and then you can't transfer out of it to your everyday account.
Well, you can still, so for example, I have an ING account and a CBA account, right? So I can transfer between those. It might take a day for things to transfer these days. It used to take 2 or 3 days to clear. Now it's overnight, right? So you can still do that. But you could have your savings account with another institution and just lose your password. So you can't log in. Something like that is an alternative. But you can just go in and say to them, take it off. Just take it off my net bank, I don't want to see it. So it just depends on who you're with, but definitely shop around for the type of account. If you're talking about your savings account, you want something that's earning interest. Because if you're not earning interest, who's heard of the phrase inflation before? Inflation? A few people. Who's done a bit of economics? Anyone? Okay, so the theory is, have you ever heard your great-grandparents or grandparents say to you, back in my day it used to cost $2 to go see a movie? Yeah, you've heard that? Yeah, it did. It used to cost $2, but that was the hourly wage, right? Right now, a movie ticket is probably the same as an hourly wage, right? It's the same back then. That's inflation. The price of things goes up, right? So the $20 that you have this year only buys you the equivalent of about $17 worth the next year. Well, that's a bit exaggerated. $100 would buy $97 worth. That's what inflation is, okay? So if you only have a bank balance that's so much and you just save that money, in 20 years it'll be practically worthless, okay? You have to earn interest just to stay even. It's really important because if you've just got the money sitting there and not accruing any interest, you're really losing an opportunity and the money is becoming worth less, okay? Don't worry too much about that. Just know that you need to look for an interest-bearing account on your savings. Make sense?
What's like a good interest rate?
Okay, so at the moment, now this is a really good question. Who's got a mortgage in here? Okay, mortgage? No? Okay. This is a really good test to see whether you think interest rates are going up or down. Every bank will be different. We have the Reserve Bank of Australia sets the standard rate. So you guys would have heard once a month, first Tuesday of the month they meet and they decide whether rates are going to go up or down or stay the same. And they have stayed the same at the lowest they have ever been in Australian history for 20 months in a row now, which should say to you, our economy is not good. That's bad, okay? Until they start increasing interest rates, the economy is not looking very healthy, particularly because it's been at the lowest it's ever been. So that's the rate at which is supposed to be like the wholesale rate, 1.5%. So what you'll find, I'm going to have to go and log in again in a minute, sorry about that. What you'll find is that then the banks add a premium to that, okay? Now what they'll do is add a slight premium to the savings rate. So they might say, okay, well, we pay 1.5% on it, we'll give you 2%, okay? So you might find there are accounts that go anywhere from 2 to 2.5 on savings. Term deposits getting a little bit higher because you lock your money up for a period of time, whether it's months or years. You say, well, I'm just going to leave that money in a chunk, and so they might pay you 3%. But then what they do is say the mortgage rate is 4%. Now, the reason why they want you to save is because for every dollar you give them, they can loan someone else $10, an imaginary $10, by the way. They make the $10 up. And they charge them 4 to 20% interest. Okay? That's how banks make money. They sell debt. That's their job. That's why they want you to save. That's why they give you interest. Because every dollar that you leave in their bank account allows them to loan $10 to somebody else and charge a heap more interest and keeps them running. That's how banks work. Pretty good business, right? This is why they're in it. So I would say that's a very long story to get to your answer about interest rates, but that's how to think about it. When you've got the standard RBA rate, you've got a slightly higher rate for savings, slightly higher again for a term deposit, and then your debt rate will be higher, starting with mortgage being the lowest, and then going all the way to credit cards, which will be in up to 20%. Okay, so at the moment, if you could get 2%, 2 to 2.5 on a standard account that's not a term deposit, you're doing pretty well. Okay. Term deposit rates, this is a good test for those of you with a mortgage. If you go in and ask what's the term deposit rate for locking your money up for 6 months versus 3 years. If those rates are the same, the bank thinks that the mortgage rate is going to stay the same. If they say that the 3-year rate is slightly higher, they think the interest rate is going to go up. If they say the 3-year rate is slightly lower, they think the interest rate is going to go down. I work on the premise that the banks know a lot more about the economy than I do. That's my gut feel test for whether things are going to go up. At the moment, they're the same. They are not expecting changes. Okay, but the trick with a term deposit is that you are signing up for a period of time. You know, whether it's 6 months or 2 years or 3 years, whatever you sign up for. So the bank has this guaranteed, I've got this much money, I can loan out 10 times that amount. If you decide to put your money out of the term deposit, you lose the interest, right? So if you've signed up for 3 years and you pull out at 2 years 11, you lose all the interest, which would suck, right? But that's the difference with the term deposit. That's why they give you a slightly higher rate than just a standard savings account, because you're taking a bit more risk. Make sense? Yeah?
Would you recommend any websites that compare the interest rate for savings accounts? Like, I know there are some.
Yeah, there's probably a few.
Some by the Australian government that seem kind of legit-ish.
I'm sure there are. So I've used CanStar before, but I think you pay for that. Like, people pay to become listed on there, so it doesn't list them all. I just do a Google search. Like, MoneySmart is the other one. Has anyone accessed moneysmart.gov.au?
The government one.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
probably what I'm thinking of. Just
Yeah, that's the central
I don't think
government one.
it's a good indicator, but
Yeah, it gives you a gut feel. And there's heaps of bloggers that make a lot of money out of directing traffic to their website by like reviewing the 10 best accounts and stuff. So a Google search is a good place to start. But MoneySmart is the government organisation, so they're run by ASIC, which is the Australian Securities and Investment Commission. So they're very trustworthy. CanStar is popular, but as I said, I think you pay for that one. So you're never quite sure, right, because they're paying to be listed. So never quite sure whether that one's unbiased. I'd probably start with MoneySmart. Make sense?
In the current economy, would you go variable or fixed?
I've never gone fixed, ever.
Okay.
And the reason for that is generally when you pay for fixed, you're paying to lock it in for certainty, right? You want to know what your interest payment is going to be, right? If you sign up for fixed and the interest rate drops, then and you say I want to go lower, then you have to pay the difference, right? So there's a disincentive. If you were worried that interest rates were going to go up quickly, it would be sensible to fix. But interest rates come down quick and go up slow. That's generally how it happens. They do very incremental. So you should have a bit of an advance warning. Again, what I would do is go in and ask a bank, right, on a term deposit of 6 months and 3 years, what's the interest rate you're going to offer me? And if they're similar, then I would never fix. If there was a dramatic difference, if they were thinking, hey, interest rates are going to shoot up quickly, then maybe you'd think about fixing. And certainly you might save yourself, a few hundred, maybe a few $1,000 by doing that over, a 2 or 3 year period. But no one has a crystal ball. Everyone has been saying that interest rates were going to go up for a year now. It's been a year. Well, the rate's going up, the rate's going up. The reason why people want you to think the rates are going up is because it's a positive news story. You become positive about spending money. You pump money into the economy. The government doesn't have to stress so much. Fortunately, we're not all that stupid. We're all paying attention. So as much as that is the intention, that they're trying to generate a positive feeling, it's in their interest to make it look like it's going up. It's probably not anytime soon. Okay, but that's my test, is always go in and ask the term deposit rate for a short term and then a long term deposit and see whether those rates are comparable. And depending on which one's higher, that will tell you what they think is going to happen with interest rates. But yeah, I remember my bank called me up 6 months ago, oh, you should fix, it's going up. I'm like, it would be fixed at the same rate. I wouldn't have lost anything, but like, has it gone up?
When we had our mortgage, it was, I think 10 years ago, it was like 7.5% or something.
Well, you
And
know.
now it's down to what, and a lot of friends of ours did lock it in because they were worried it was going to go up. And then like 6 months later, it was down to like 3.5%. So those people were locked in for 5 years, paying 7.5% when it had dropped to 3.5%.
Yeah, and if you want to drop it, then you pay the difference.
Yeah.
The bank gets their money. The banks win with fixing, is my opinion, not us. The only reason you would ever fix is if you need absolute certainty about how much your mortgage is going to be to sleep well at night. If you're the sort of person who would freak out because something goes up. But I always think if interest rates go up, then that means the economy is doing well. My pay rate will probably go up. Rent will probably go up, right? So the things that would cover the difference should theoretically, within a 6 month sort of time period, go up with them. So that's why I've never worried about it. I've always been like, oh, well, if they go up, they go up. But to add to that one, so 7.5%, now Karen's gone out the back. Does anyone here have parents that had
10%.
mortgage in 1990?
Late
Yeah.
80s, early 90s.
Yeah, 1989. So that was like buying a house on a credit card, paying 18% interest. 18. It's astronomical, like impossible.
And that was at the time before wages had really gone up as well. So
Yeah.
people really were struggling.
Oh yeah, so it sparked a recession. We had a recession because of it. And many people lost their homes because you couldn't afford it. It's ridiculous. Like that impact, it's not it's going to be 4 times the amount of mortgage repayment. It's like 16 times the mortgage repayment of what we've got at our current rates. Like imagine your mortgage repayment getting zeros added on the end. Like that's what it's like. And people they lost homes over it. Now that was before we had an RBA managing the interest rate. That was when the government used to manage the interest rate. And in 1992, I think some very smart people looked at the government and went, you should not be allowed to be in charge of the interest rate. And the RBA has taken over since then. And so now I think the highest we've had is about 9.5%, half of that 18. That was 2006-ish, something like that. And the lowest is, of course, what we've got now. But as I said, if you look at the trends, and I can probably find some data for you, but it's all available on the ABS. It always goes down quick, up slow. Okay, so you generally see incremental increases because the RBA is trying to keep our economy at a specific level of inflation. They target 2 to 3%. So at the moment, our inflation is low. Theoretically, what they then do is drop interest rates to try and get you to spend more, because when it's low interest rates, you're more likely to borrow. You pump money into the economy, inflation speeds up, and they go, oh, we're getting up to the 3%, and now we increase rates. That's the theoretical how it works, but we've got a very interesting debt cycle that means that might not be what happens next. I'll give you guys a link to watch a cool animation about that if you like. Does that answer you guys' questions on the interest rates stuff?
So would you be better, if you could afford it, you'd be better to put money aside to save for a house or a car rather than getting a loan?
I would say so. I will show you why. I'll just, okay, we'll talk about your question now. So I think that's it for saving. Who here is going to go home and make sure they've got a savings account with an interest rate and that it's segregated from their other stuff and look at their rate? Yeah, a few of you? Please do it. If you do nothing else, do that. All right, you can always get the money back out of savings. It's still there. You haven't spent it. The second rule is the one we're going to spend a lot of time on now, buying assets. So the savings are good, right? You're going to earn some interest on those. The interest will basically keep the money at the same amount as you earn it. Like, so you'll have $100 this year, you'll earn your 2%, you'll have 102 next year, you'll buy the same amount of stuff that you could have bought this year with $100. It's just keeping you even. What we want to do is take some of those savings and buy assets with them. Who here is an accountant or has done accounting studies? Okay. What I'm about to say sends most accountants into conniptions because there is a traditional accounting version of a definition of an asset and a liability, okay? The bank uses it. Okay, they're absolutely useless for us, okay? There are 2 things you need to remember here. Assets put money in your pocket, okay? Can you guess what a liability does?
Takes money out of your pocket.
Exactly. Okay, so we got it? All right. Everyone stand up for me, please, in your spot. All right, using that definition, sit down if you think a car is an asset. Okay, car's an asset, car's an asset. Okay, why do you think a car is an asset?
I love everything about cars. So.
The bank will put your car in the asset column. So the bank would agree with you right now. That's because they can sell it. If you don't pay your mortgage, you don't pay your repayment, they will sell your car. They don't care if you've got to walk. It is an asset to them. It's not an asset to you. The car takes money out of your pocket. You have to pay for registration, you have to pay for insurance, you have to pay for maintenance, you have to pay for petrol. And it depreciates, it goes down in value. The moment you drove it off the lot when it was brand new, it lost 20% as you left the driveway. Okay? Alright? Sorry?
That's a good percentage.
Yeah, if you did well, yeah. It is a liability. The one exception would be a car like this where you are buying a vintage car that is going to go up. And if you're going to do that, you're going to be about 0.01% of the Australian population who can pick those, okay? Most of us are not going to do that. Almost all cars are liabilities. Okay, everybody who's still standing. Sit down if you think a home that you live in is an asset. The home that you live in. Okay. Well, you're thinking about it, aren't you? All right. Either way, doesn't matter actually. The home you live in. Can the home you live in pay you? Can it put money in your pocket? No. Not until you sell it. It will never pay you. You will be paying rates on it. You will be paying insurance on it. You'll be paying maintenance. Unless you rent every room of that house out, it is unlikely to make you a dime. Okay, regardless of the mortgage. Then you add the mortgage in, definitely a liability. The home you live in is a luxury. It is not an asset. It is not the first thing you buy. It is a luxury item, the same as a car. Those two things I'll allow you as a luxury. Everything else that is not an asset, that doesn't put anything in your pocket, is a liability. And if you pay interest on it, you're crazy. Liabilities you pay cash for. Okay? You pay interest on something that goes down in value and costs you more. You're paying more than the sticker price for something that is losing you money. It is a bad use of your money. So, you can all sit down now. You did very well, by the way, everybody who had the guts to sit down at the beginning there. But your home will never pay you. Now, if this was an investment property, could it be an asset?
It depends on, well, yes, an investment property is, but if it was the house you were living in, but you were renovating it, smartly, then...
Yeah, if you sold it. But once you've sold it, it's gone.
Yeah.
You've only got the capital, you don't have the asset anymore.
Investment.
Could be. If it was an investment property, so someone was paying you rent, if the rent that you received was more than the costs of owning the property, that includes your interest, your rates, your insurance, your agent's fees, all the things that come with owning an investment property, it would be an asset.
But the government would sting you for it with capital gains.
If you sold it, they sting you for it. Now, we want to keep our assets, okay? The point of an asset is that it puts money in your pocket. If you sell it, you've banked the money, you put the money in the bank and you earn 2.5% interest on it. Not a very good return. A property, we would hope, would go up a lot more in the long term. Shares, we would hope, would grow more in the long term, and we want them to pay us. So common assets. Cash, earning you interest. Now, the things that you earn are like the asset's way of saying thank you for putting money into me. So cash, your thank you for putting money into me is interest. The bank pays you that interest, and as I said, that's because they take every dollar that you've put in and they loan someone else 10 imaginary dollars and charge them heaps more interest, okay? So it is an awesome deal for a banker. Bonds. Who's heard of bonds before? Okay. Does anyone feel comfortable explaining them, or do you want a quick rundown? Quick rundown? We'll go with a quick rundown. They're basically an IOU. Slightly higher return than cash. You get them from usually governments. So the Australian government releases bonds. So you give them some cash and they say, we're going to pay you back at a maturity date. And you can have short-term, medium-term and long-term bonds. So short-term ones might be just a couple of years, long-term ones might be 30 years, and they'll offer you an interest rate. Sometimes they will index those to inflation. Okay, so you can have, sorry?
Is that like a HEX debt, a student debt?
Interesting. Now, HEX debt is the cheapest loan you'll ever get. It's the one loan that I would say you could keep. So that's when you're paying interest. But yeah, that's probably how the government gets some of the money, is they say, hey, you lovely taxpayer, would you like to buy a bond in the Australian government and then I'll give you X% interest back. And that's how they fund the HEX debt probably. But it's basically very similar to cash, and you can sell it at any time and you get what's called a yield. Okay, so if you're getting like 2.5% on your cash at the moment, you might get 3% on a bond. Okay, so slightly higher. Then you have shares. Who's familiar with shares? Reasonably? Okay. So when I'm talking about shares, I'm talking about you owning a little tiny piece of a company. Okay? Now, I can't walk up, if I own BHP Billiton shares, I can't walk up to the BHP Billiton office and go, I own that brick, right? It's not like that. You own a theoretical small portion of all of their assets. Okay? So when you see the share prices, what we're hoping for when we buy a share is that the company that we've bought shares in will grow. It will use all its human resources to make good things and add value to stuff, and therefore the value will grow. We also want it to pay us in the form of dividends. Dividends are the company's way of saying, thank you for believing in us. Here's some of our profits back to you so that you'll stay in with our share. They don't want you buying and selling every 5 minutes. They want you to stay on. So that's the way they say thank you. Now, dividends can be 4 to 8%. Okay? Much better than interest rates. And if you get growth, of course, the percentage means a lot more in terms of dollar terms. But what you might find is you buy a share and the value goes down, and then your 4 to 8% might be the equivalent amount of the if you had it in dollars. It's a bit of a guessing game. But that's what we're hoping for with shares. We're hoping that we're going to buy into a company, and that company is going to do well, and they're going to share some of the profits with us as dividends. So that comes as an income. You don't have to sell the share. You get the dividend check twice a year, and they say, here you go. Thanks for being with us. Property is about rent. So you can buy a property, a residential property, a commercial property. You can buy one parking lot square, you know. All sorts of ways that you can earn rent off land. And the theory behind that, of course, is that buy land because they're not making it anymore. That's a Mark Twain quote, I think. It's basically this idea of people will always need somewhere to live or to put their stuff or to run their businesses from. And if you own the premises, then they pay you rent. Now, the reason why it's in that order is because of the ease to get into and the risk associated with the debt you'll take on. The first three you do not need debt for, right? You should not take on debt for shares, in my opinion. I don't think it's a good idea, particularly if you're new to it. There are people who will take on margin loans, the theory being that the dividends pay the interest and then you're just relying on the growth. Please, unless you are an expert in this stuff, don't attempt a strategy like that. Property almost always requires debt, because it's generally in the orders of hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the amount of time it would take you to save the amount that you would require to buy the home outright, the price has probably gone up, right? And then you can't afford it anymore. So the idea is that you save a deposit, you go to the bank and ask for a mortgage, and they give you the bulk of the money, and then you pay them back each week, each fortnight, each month, whatever you've picked. Those are the most common types of assets. Now, there are lots of other different types. There are commodities. So you can buy sheep, you can buy grain, you can buy metals, gold, silver, nickel. We've got plenty of aluminium along here as well, you know, like, yeah, all sorts of stuff. Lithium's coming in. You can guess by buying some of that metal, and you can buy it like a share. So you don't actually physically have to do it. Though I do have friends who have had 2-ton bags of nickel briquettes in their backyard. Okay, so you can do that as well. There's all sorts of stuff like that. Please don't get too excited about those unless you're an expert in those areas. They are specific markets. These are the most general, most accessible, most familiar markets to everyday people like us, okay? These are the ones that you should be looking to learn about and that you should be thinking about what kind of assets suit you. Now, I bought my first property before I bought my shares, like 6 years before I bought my shares. I bought property when I was 19. I was a student. I knew I had 2 more years of university and I wasn't going to be earning an income. So it was actually, in retrospect, extraordinarily risky, and I'm very lucky that it worked out, okay? It worked out really well because I put down a 30% deposit, borrowed 70%, rented out the second room. My mortgage was $110 a week. I rented out the second room for $90 a week. I could not have rented a room for $20 a week. Like, it was $100 a week to rent a room from somebody. So I was much better off than had I rented. I was really lucky, it turns out. I'm glad I did it. But would I recommend people do the same thing today? Teenagers particularly? I'm not sure, to be brutally honest. I think it's an achievable goal if you're willing to rent out and sublet rooms and you're willing to stay in the long run for property. And this is definitely a good market to be buying in Perth because it's pretty low at the moment. But when I was graduating from university, I knew I would get a really good job. I knew there'd be competition. I would be able to get my pay increased. My pay doubled within 3 years of coming out of university, and I knew I was coming into that market. The employment market is different today. If you are not confident that you're going to have a nice stable income in the next 3 to 5 years, think very hard before you go into property. Because if you find that your income won't cover your mortgage, even if you rent out rooms, then you might find yourself in a position where you have to sell the property. And that's where it becomes really risky. So although I love property, I think it's fabulous. You need to do your maths on property. Shares is one you can get into with a few $100. Okay? So you don't have to have tens of thousands of dollars as a deposit. So that's why I put them in that order. Cash is the easy no-brainer one. It's going to keep you pretty much even. Bonds is slightly more advanced. Lots of people will get into bonds. If you've got, who's got superannuation account here? You probably all own bonds already. Probably. Very popular for financial people. Not many individuals go and buy them, but in terms of financial asset management in, superannuation companies, very popular. Shares, quite accessible. Property requires debt. I do love property, but think very carefully about your earning potential if you're going to take on property. Yes?
With shares, how much minimum can you start?
You know what the best thing about shares is now? We can buy them online without having to go through a broker. So, in the past, has anyone seen the 1980s movies where you've got the stockbrokers going, buy, buy, sell, sell? All that, yeah, okay, right. Don't do that anymore. Don't need to do it. We can ignore it. We can sit on our computer and just do our orders whenever we like. And so instead of having to pay a few $100 every time we want to buy some shares, we can now pay $10. So what it used to be is people used to say, well, you don't want to buy a share unless you're going to buy like 10 grand's worth because the cost of the transaction is high. So that's like, stamp duty when you buy property is like 10, 20 grand, whatever it might be. It's like the tax that you pay for buying it. Now, because the brokerage is so low, it's a really small percentage. So if you bought $1,000 worth of shares and you're only paying $10 as the fee to make it, that's nothing. You don't really care. You could buy $1,000 worth of shares every week and who cares about the transaction fee, right? You don't wait until you've got 20 grand to do it and then you'll only pay $20 in your brokerage. Because brokerage is so cheap these days, you could go and buy one share. Go and buy like one $50 share, pay $10. So long as you make the growth in the next few years, it doesn't matter, right? So don't think that with shares you have to save hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. You can start with a few hundred or, a couple of grand. Okay?
Have you heard of the Acorns account?
I have heard of Acorns, yep. Not a fan. High fees. So there's quite a few theories with these, right? We'll talk a little bit more about this in the superannuation thing I'll do at the end. But when you're buying shares, you can do a few things. You can either go, I really like companies XYZ. I'm going to buy 1/3 of this one, 1/3 of that one with my money. I've got $1,000, I'm going to buy $300 worth of each or whatever. Or you can buy an index fund. Now, an index fund is like buying a tiny little piece of all of the top 200 shares. So if you buy like an ASX 200 index fund, it's like saying, I'm buying one little tiny fraction of all of those 200 companies. And the theory behind that is immediate diversification, right? Lots of different industries, lots of different types of companies. If one goes up, another one will go down, they'll all kind of even out. What you're betting on then is that the share market overall will go up. And that's what Acorns and a lot of these investment types that are very low fee, theoretically, Acorns is not low fee, the low fee ones are trying to get you into an index fund so that you're basically betting on the share market going up or down. The diversification part of that means that you don't have to, the company who's doing it isn't doing lots of regular transactions, so they don't have to charge you lots of fees. And so the theory is that they should be able to provide that at a very low fee rate. Now, unfortunately, Acorns has to pay for the fact that it's taking little fractions of your transactions. So you might be saying, oh, my coffee was $3.50, rounded up to $4, that 50 cents goes off to Acorns. I don't notice it because it's what I would have paid for coffee elsewhere. They've got to manage heaps of transactions and they've got to track a lot of stuff and they need advanced software. So their fees go into that. So if you don't have a certain level of money in Acorns, then they hit you with a ridiculous fee, in my opinion, too much for what they're doing. You could buy an ASX index fund. You buy like one share of a company, just pay the one-off transaction fee and not pay the ongoing percentage fee that you do with Acorns. It just requires you to save, okay? Now, the reason why people like Acorns sometimes is that they consider themselves compulsive spenders. They're like, I can't save, I'm a terrible saver, I give up, I'm just gonna get the Acorns up and then I won't worry about it. But are you guys gonna do that? No, you're gonna be good savers. So you won't necessarily need it. And you can get access to the same kind of investment options that they do at a very low price to get into and then not have to pay the ongoing percentage maintenance fee that they're going to continue to charge you.
There are accounts that do that rounding up for you as well, right?
Yeah, yeah, you can. I think ING's got one. I think there's probably several now. At the moment, this is the great thing about the internet, right? The moment one bank brings it out, they've all got to bring it out now. Like in the next 12 months, they'll all have one. Yeah. Yeah. So you can do it. And so you don't then have to pay the management fee that you're paying Acorns, right? So there's lots of options. Yeah. Make sense? First thing I would recommend you all do, and you could do it now if you want to, well, not right now, but like tonight, is go and join the ASX share market game. Okay, so asx.com.au, they run a game. They give you a virtual $50,000. It doesn't cost you anything. You trade in a live market for 15 weeks. Okay, so they give you money and then you have to go and decide which share you're going to buy, right? And there's a few arbitrary rules that they've placed. One is like you can't have more than 1/4 of your portfolio buying. So like if you get 50 grand, you can't buy them more than $12,500 worth of a share. All right, so you've got to have an immediate diversification. But you'll go through exactly the process that you would go through on an online system, which is deciding whether you're going to do price to market or price limit, what date you want to buy. You'll have to look at when dividends come out because dividends affect price. All that kind of research you'll learn through doing the game. So if you're like me, I'm a learn by doing kind of person rather than a learn by study. That is a great way to go. Go and join the game, get your virtual $50,000. They've got a great online platform where you can go in and look at all the companies, read all the annual reports, right? For me, you've got to decide, if you're going to invest in shares, you've got to decide what kind of investor you're going to be. Now, there are several ways that people make money in shares. One is the Warren Buffett way. Who's heard of Warren Buffett? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, this is probably the one that you need to think about then. Who's heard of Warren Buffett? Yeah, okay. Most famous investor in the world, probably worth about $100 billion, gave $80 billion of it away recently. Pretty awesome dude. 86 years old, I think. Buying one share in his company is $250,000 and he doesn't pay dividends because he thinks he can do a better job with the profit than you can, and he's probably right. His theory is buy really good companies that are undervalued. Buy companies that you believe are fabulous and they are priced low at the moment. For whatever reason. The way that the market operates is a piece of news comes out. You know, oh, we're going to war with Korea. Share prices drop. Nothing to do with the company. Wait for an opportunity to buy it cheaply. There might be reasons that the company might be going cheap, but a company that you believe is going to grow. Buy that share, hold that share, roll your dividends back into that share and watch it grow. So that's the kind of, if you're the sort of person who doesn't want to trade all the time, doesn't want to watch it all the time, you would pick something like that, okay? If you're a lazy share investor. I am a lazy share investor. I do not want to look at my shares every day. I think it's boring. And also if you're a bit risk averse. Now the difficulty there is if you pick a company that doesn't do brilliantly, right? When do you know when to get out? And that's why you don't want to be doing this with money that you need to pay the rent, okay? You want to have your buffer fund and then your money on top of that. Because what happens, there's a theory that the share market is actually operated not by any kind of math, it's operated by fear and greed, okay? It's all human emotion. And that's why things happen and change a share price, but it's nothing to do with that share. So you've got to be prepared to wait out those kinds of periods and have trust in the one that you've got, and then have a cut-off limit which says, oh, well, if it drops by this much, I'm going to sell. And there's a couple of strategies you can use with options and covered calls to protect yourself. They call that insurance. That's a bit complicated. That's one end of the spectrum. That's the person who's like, I am a fundamental person. I believe in the fundamentals of this company. I think this company is going to do well. At the other end, you've got people who don't care about the company at all. They are just looking at the trend. They are watching that the price went up by this much, went down by that much. It's done this many waves. I'm going to buy at this point and sell at that point. And they follow rules. And they're often data scientists and theoretical physicists, people who love maths, that have done all these amazing algorithms. If you're going to do that one, you're competing against people who have, I'm not kidding here, in New York they fly drones around their buildings with Wi-Fi on them so that they can make their transaction 1/10,000th of a second quicker than their competitor. Okay, because that 1/10,000th of a second adds up to 0.001 cent difference in share price, and that's a profit margin. So if you want a day trade, that gets called, that's what you're competing against. Some people do it very successfully. It's like having a job because you have to like actually watch it, right? The theory they will have then is, oh, I've got an algorithm that does it all for me. Yeah, you still got to keep tweaking the algorithm, unfortunately. So that's the two ends of the spectrum. And then you've got in the middle this idea of the index funds, the immediate diversification. I'm just going to buy a little bit of everything, and then I'm betting on the overall economy going up or down, okay? And that's another sort of lazy way. So you've got to kind of think about what you want to do. If you want to buy a share because you believe in the company, you're going to start doing research on their annual report. You're going to see what kind of a balance sheet they've got. Do they have lots of debt? Do they have lots of equity? What's their cash flow like? What's their market like? Are they likely to be, is Tesla going to wipe them out tomorrow? That kind of thing. You've got to think about those kinds of things and whether they're going to give you a dividend or not. I also have a look at whether they've got a dividend reinvestment scheme. So I don't like to get my dividends because I don't need them at the moment. I like my dividends to come back to me as more shares. It's like having compound interest. So, things like that can affect you. But you start doing a lot of research, getting familiar with what the companies are and what the markets are if you're going to go the fundamentals way. If you're going to go the diversification way, you're looking at the economy. How's the economy going overall? Do I think it's a good time to buy? Do I think it's going to keep going? And then if you're going to day trade, it's all on maths. And it's really boring in my opinion, but some people love it, right? Any theoretical physicists in the room or data scientists? No, okay. Maybe not your thing. Does that make sense? Yeah, you got to think long and hard about it. This is what I mean about being asset agnostic. All of these things can work. It's about what you want to do with your time, okay, and how you want to spend it. All right?
Cash works. I don't really understand the cash.
So that's putting the money in the bank and earning interest off it. So the bank pays you interest. Yeah. So whether you put it in as just a transaction account that earns 2% interest, or whether you put it in a term deposit and it pays you a bit more interest. Yeah. So that one's the reason.
One that's not a gamble is cash.
That's right, but that's why it's the crappiest return.
The less risk.
Yeah, exactly. And it is the bare minimum. You have to earn that, otherwise you're going backwards. If you leave your cash stuck under a mattress somewhere or in an account that doesn't earn interest, you're going backwards. So you have to do that at the very minimum. Yeah, well, hope not. Yeah, exactly. Well, we've all seen Breaking Bad, probably. Don't put it in the air conditioning vent. All right, any more questions on the types of assets? All right, I'm just going to check how we're going for time. Oh, yeah, not too bad. Okay, that's good. Okay. Now we're going to talk a little bit about debt. Okay, there are two types of debt. There is good debt and there is bad debt. Can you guess what good debt would be for?
Earning income.
Property.
An asset. Yes, so property fits in that, yep. An asset. Good debt is for an asset. Now, I don't think that debt for shares is a great idea, because if you're paying interest on it and your dividends don't cover that, then you could be making a loss. But generally, it's smart to use debt wisely for things like assets, because what we're hoping is that the amount of interest we're paying is less than the growth we're going to get. So if you're paying 3.9% on your mortgage and you're getting 5% growth, the theory is you're doing better, right? You've got that 1.1% difference, so you're actually ahead of the game. So that's when it can be sensible. If it's a liability, it's bad debt. Okay, so payday loans, personal loans, car loans, credit cards, all these things, bad debt, okay? If you need bad debt to pay for something, you are living beyond your means. You are spending more than you can afford, and you are paying more than the sticker price. That's the problem, right? So I'll give you an example. Let's say you go on a holiday. I had a client who did this. You go on a holiday and you put it all on credit card. $10,000. Yeah. So $10,000 holiday, fabulous time, went to Greece, awesome. $10,000 debt on a credit card, which is at 18% interest, which is pretty normal. Some of them can go as high as like 29% interest. You can get lower ones that are 9%, but basically it's high. Have you guys, who's had a credit card statement in front of them before? Who's seen a credit card statement? Okay, so on a credit card statement, it will say a minimum repayment. This is the repayment you must make in order to make us convinced that you are actually paying off your debt. If you stuck to the minimum repayments on that $10,000, you would eventually have paid off $36,000. How's that for a bargain? Your holiday cost 36 grand. Do you know how long it would take you to pay it off if you stuck to minimum repayments?
It's about 25 years.
44 years. 44 years. Okay? Right? You might go to your grave with that debt. Terrible idea. Terrible idea. Okay? If you want to spend money on bad debt, it means you need to stop and save. Do not pay interest on things that depreciate.
Listening teacher said he recommended me never get a credit card.
Well, this is an interesting debate. So it's a fascinating one. Now, I'm actually pro credit card. Now, the Barefoot Investor, you guys heard of the Barefoot Investor? So he tried to buy my company last year, and I didn't sell it to him because I disagree with his opinion on 3 things, and one of them is credit cards. Now, who's seen the movie Catch Me If You Can? Yeah? Okay. So the guy is like a fraudster. He's a real person, Frank Abagnale, and I got to see him talk in America in 2012, and he now works full-time for the FBI detecting fraud. And he said, I will never spend money on anything but a credit card. And do you know why? It's because you're risking the bank's money, not your money.
My friend just did a round the world trip business class for 4 kids, 2 adults on rewards points.
Oh my God, that's fabulous. I don't do it for the points.
He's amazing though. He's
Yeah.
got like, he gives a list to his wife on where she can buy what.
Oh yeah, so you can get 3 or 4 times points, yeah. So that's a very organised person. I'm not very organised. The reason why I do it is because if someone steals my credit card number and they put a transaction on my credit card and I didn't authorise it, the bank calls me and they say, hey, we saw a weird transaction. Was that you? And I go, no. And they go, cool, we'll cancel that. We'll reverse the charge. We'll send you a new credit card. Don't worry about a thing. It happens that day. It's happened to me twice. They pick it up because it's their money. Because if I call them up and say, I didn't authorise that, they have to pay it. They care about that money. If you use a Visa debit card, it's your money. Do you think they chase it as quickly? Now, theoretically, it's got the same protection, but it'll take you at least 2 weeks to get that money back. Okay? Now, that might be the difference for people who are living pay to pay between needing to go into serious debt or not. In this day, yeah?
It was only like $30, but it only was lucky that I was checking my online statement because normally I don't, and I didn't even notice until I saw it. And I was like, what the hell is that? And they chased it up, and luckily I got my money back.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the thing though. So using a debit card's great in theory, but you have to be proactive. I'm lazy. I make the credit card company do the work. But I never pay interest on my credit card because guess what? You can go into the bank. Well, I go into the bank and I sign a form that says I want my credit card balance paid off in full from my savings account every month. I've never paid interest. The bank worries about it for me. My job is to make sure there's enough money in the account, but I don't have to remember to pay. They just take it out of the account, okay? Keep your limit low as you possibly can live with it. And remember, you can increase your limit and then drop it back. I've done that before when I've needed to buy like a bed or something, you know, increase the limit and then you call them up. They won't ever offer to reduce it. You have to call them up for that. They'll always offer to increase it. But having a credit card for the fraud protection alone, I think is worth it. Don't go getting a $20,000 limit on your credit card though, if you can avoid it, okay? Because it is tempting, it does burn a hole in your pocket. But having a credit card, if you're going to do any kind of transaction overseas, any kind of online transaction, the fraud protection you get from a credit card alone makes it worth it. There's lots of other perks like points and travel insurance and stuff like that. So if you're smart about it and get a reasonable type of card, that can work. But if they're going to charge you an annual fee for it, that's where it starts to get a bit muddy. Like, would you be better off keeping the $300?
I think the way
He's probably.
he's
Got all that. But don't go getting a card and finding out it's $500 a year to have that particular type of card because you get an extra 1,000 frequent flyer points or something. There's a bit of maths behind it. Don't get the credit card for that reason. Don't get it for the rewards. Get it for the fraud protection.
What's a good credit card rate?
So there's lots of credit card rates that you can get that they don't get advertised widely because they don't make as much money, but like 9%. But I basically just set it up so that I never pay interest. So my credit cards have like 18 and 20% interest on them. I've got 2. Because I use one for business and one for personal stuff. Both have got low limits, but they're both set up so they're automatically paid. So I've never paid interest. It's just like using it as a transaction account. But I've got fraud protection. That's the way I think about it. So if anyone uses a card skimmer or anything like that, at least it's not me paying for it. The bank pays for it and then they chase it and I'm not out of pocket.
Is that when you use it when you've got the money in there?
Well, the way I use it is it's like a traditional credit card. So like I've got a limit, but my savings account, I always make sure that I've got enough of a buffer in my savings account for my limit. So my limit on one card is $3,000. That's quite a lot, I think, right? So I've always got $3,000 at least in my savings account that's linked to it. Not my whiz-bang savings account with the good interest rate, my transaction account, you might say. I always make sure I've got that buffer.
So that you can detect fraud.
Exactly. Well, I don't even have to detect the fraud. The bank calls me. That's what I like about it. They call me and go like, hey, did you just buy a ticket to Europe? No? Okay, good. We'll sort that out for you. And because it's their money, they care about it.
So your savings account is not exposed.
Yeah, exactly. So if you use PayPal linked to a savings account,
That's exposed.
I know it's theoretically very safe, but nothing is really safe. So being the cynical person that I am, I would much rather have everything through a credit card that I can then just call the bank and be like, no, I didn't authorise that, and then they have to reverse it. Make sense? Okay. So that, I think, is a very accurate representation of what most people think of with credit cards. You know, the average, I think it's 21 to 25-year-olds at the moment are carrying forward $2,300 worth of credit card debt each month. It's the average in Australia. Our credit card debt, our household debt is something like 200% of GDP. It's like, well, that's some of the highest in the developed world. We're bankrupt as individuals in Australia. If all of our loans were called in, all of our debts were called in, we'd all be homeless. it's not sustainable, right? And it's because we've become reliant on living beyond our means. Please resist the urge. Please buy a cheap car, save the money that you need to go on holiday, save the money for whatever it is that your liability is. Don't pay more than the sticker price. Don't pay $36,000 for a $10,000 holiday. Okay, make sense? Yeah?
Sorry.
Yep.
What if I went in and like I had the option of like a really low deposit to get this car, but then I went in and put on like 50% instead? Would that?
So you mean like have a $10,000 car and you pay $5,000 and they pay and you pay that. So you're still going to be paying more. The point is that you're going to be paying more than the $10,000. You're going to be paying interest. If you want to do that for whatever reason you want to do it, your aim then is to pay it off as quickly as you can. Time is the big deciding factor here. So more than the minimum repayment as quickly as you can. I personally think you buy the cheapest, crappiest car that you can, right? That's my opinion. But I don't really care about cars. Like, cars just don't do it for me. If you really care about cars, then hey, maybe you'd pay a bit more. I just want a safe, basic car that's not going to crash and will be safe for my children. That's all I really care about. But they're always going to depreciate. They're always going to cost you more money. So if you're paying interest on them, that money that you've put into that car and that you're paying off on that loan is something that you're not putting into shares. You're not putting into property. You're not putting into all your other stuff that's going to get you ahead. So you've got to weigh it up. You've got to have a think about it. But if you are going to take on a loan like that, or if you have a loan like that at the moment, pay it off as quickly as you can. Prioritise it. Make sense? Okay. Oh, this thing is really... All right. The last thing I'm going to talk about now is about superannuation. Now, you guys might wonder why anyone would talk to young people about superannuation. Who here has a superannuation account again? Who's got one? Most of you. Okay. So you are all probably already property, share and bonds investors. Okay? It's probably what your superannuation is then. Does anyone know how many superannuation accounts they have? Just one?
Oh, I do.
Two?
Sorry. It's self-managed.
Yeah, you got one? Yep, you got...
Manage it. I know
Oh, yep, you're
what
sorted.
we've got and
Yeah, one? Anyone got more? So someone with two over here. Anyone else got more than one account? 3 or 4? Okay. That money is your money. I know it doesn't feel like it. I know you can't touch it, but it is your money. If you dropped $50 in the street, would you stop and pick it up? Yeah, of course you would. So don't throw superannuation away. It is your money, okay? If you have got multiple accounts, they all have a fixed fee. It's usually $6 a month. If you have 4 accounts, you're paying 4 times as much of those fixed fees as you need to. And that is coming out of your growth, okay? There's no good reason to do that. And at the moment, you can go online to MyGov, to the ATO, and you can do your transfer across to your accounts, okay, instantly. All online, without needing a passport. I remember when I did this when I was younger, and you had to have a passport and you had to sign things, and it was horribly arduous. But now that they've got this wonderful MyGov system, it's really good.
by law, your employer has to use whatever super fund you want.
Yeah, by now, yeah. And that certainly wasn't the case. So last year, I was doing superannuation presentations. I did one here for Department of Communities. And it was for women in super. And I had been using what they call Super Seeker, which was an online system where you go and put in your tax file number, it tells you if you've got missing accounts. And I was like, oh yeah, I've done that. I couldn't find anything. They transferred across to this new system with the ATO, and I was like, oh yeah, I won't have anything. I went in there, I had an account from when I was 15 years old, right? Been sitting there for 20 years. And they had lost track of me, of course, because I've moved state and changed name and all that kind of stuff. And so I was able to just click a button and roll it all in. It took me about 2 minutes. Okay, so if you've got more than one account, please add to your homework list to go to MyGov.
I can't remember the codes or anything.
Well, that's the great thing. You don't need it now. It's so good. It's all there. Everything's there. And even if it says to you, you've got to go to the superannuation provider's website to change it over, all the numbers you need are on MyGov. So you just cut and paste them across. You don't have to go and hunt for everything. Because I was exactly the same. I'm like, I can't even remember who it's with. Like, it turned out it was Colonial.
So cheaper to put it all together then.
Yeah. So pick one fund, and then you're not paying the fixed fees multiple times. Which one to pick? Oh, that's a good question.
There's an industry fund and the industry and the...
Superannuation is a really new industry. It's only been around since like the early 90s, okay? Now I know that seems like a long time, but in the terms of finance, where banks have been around for like 150 years, it's a very new industry. And so they have been really crappy at telling consumers what's best for them. Really bad, right? To the point that now they're getting heavily regulated about it. My point for you guys is, you can do a few things up front now to make the most of what you're getting that you're getting given already. Don't let it get frittered away. So those three things are: 1, combine the funds over. 2 is go and find out what the fees on your fund are. Now, there are funds that charge as low as like 0.02% fees. Average, 1.5%. Now, that might not sound like a big deal, but the compounding over time, if you've got a difference of a few percent in your, your growth versus your fees, it's like you can halve, over the period of like 40 years, it can halve the amount of money you've got at the end. Fees are the thing you can control. They're the one thing we know. We don't know what growth we're going to get. We don't know how the economy is going to perform. We don't know for sure what's going to happen, but you do know what fees you will be charged. Your job is to go and find the lowest fees for what works for you. Now, there are what they call SMSF, self-managed super fund, light options these days, where you can go and buy like a certain type of asset. Usually it's an index fund, usually it's a balanced index fund, and they'll charge super low fees, like less than 0.1% fees. And the theory on those is that you're following the share market. If you're the sort of person who thinks they would buy an index fund with their own money, you might want to do that with your superannuation. But the point is they don't have to do lots of transactions. The superannuation company doesn't have to buy and sell shares a lot, so they don't have to pass fees on to you. It's very much set and forget for them. So they don't have to make you pay a lot. And that means that you get most of the growth. Now, the difference is if you pick a fund like that and they've got low growth, then, versus a company that's got higher growth, like a 3% difference, say, then the compounding effect, if you're paying 1% fees on the 3% extra growth, you're better off, right? The thing is, they've had a look at the superannuation funds and it doesn't really matter. They're all pretty much of a muchness. There's no fund that stood out as being like exceptional. They all report their preferred period. So some of them will be like, we've had 12% return, asterisk, for the last 12 months. And for the previous 5 years, we lost 40%, right? Stuff like that. They will present it in a way that makes it look good for them. But what you will find with whatever fund you're with, that they will have a report that comes out in your statement, usually every 6 months, that will tell you the fees for each of the options. Go and find out what you're invested in, what fees you're paying, and whether you think that's the right thing to be invested in. Because you can change what you're invested in within your super fund once a month if you like to, for no fee. So you might be like, I think the share market's going to do really well next month. I'm moving everything into shares in super, cut it all across, pay nothing. 3 months later, you go, shares look like they're about to do badly. I'm going to move it out into property. You can move it out into property the next week. It's done, right? If you're proactive about this and you're learning about this anyway because you're starting to invest, you can get ahead much more quickly if you're going to pay attention than just picking a default fund. And if you didn't nominate a fund, they will have picked one for you based on your age. They will have gone, oh, you're young. You can have a high risk fund. Or, hey, our default one is moderate or conservative or whatever they call it. And the theory is it's about your level of risk. Go and find out what you're in and whether you think it's the right thing to be in, and find out about your fees. If I listened to financial advisors and did what they say, I would have to work today. I take that money, I pay the extra tax, but then I invest the money and then I can have the assets now. I can have the rent, I can have the dividends. If you put it in super, you can't have it till you're in your, I think 67 at the moment, might be 70 something by the time we're old, without paying penalty. So you need to think long and hard about if you would actually invest the money. If you would invest the money, is it better for you to have access to that money now? Would you rather pay more tax on it so that you can have access to the growth, the rent, the dividends, whatever you get on it? In which case you might consider not putting extra into your superannuation. You might just stick to your minimum, whatever your employer is paying, okay? Make it an active decision. As I said, if I had listened to financial advisors and put extra money into superannuation, I'd have a massive superannuation fund and I would have to work. I wouldn't have a choice. Yes?
What about if you work for a company where they match your super contribution?
Well, it can be very tempting. Yep, so it's the same question again. So they're trying to incentivise you, so they're saying, hey, you get more. Would you rather have the money in your pocket? Would you do the right thing with the money if it was in your pocket? Now, if you would take that money and you know you just go and spend it, then I'd be like, yeah, put it in super. Be honest with yourself. Put it in super, because then at least you will keep the money. If you can be disciplined about it and you know you would buy assets with it, I'd be saying, well, if I'm putting money in there and I can't access it for 40 more years, do I care? I might not make it. I'd rather have the money now. But that's because I know I'll invest. You've got to be pretty honest with yourself about it.
Would you say the same thing to somebody who's self-employed?
Now that's an interesting one. Now, again, I think no matter what age you are, it's about being financially independent, right? So I'd judge it on age. So if someone was close to retirement, so like within 10 years of retiring, I'd be like, you probably are worth looking at super. But for someone who is self-employed, the point is having assets, right? Whether they're in super or whether they're assets that you own outright. I just always think it's better off owning them outright, because then you've got access, especially when you're young. I'm talking about when you're young here. You've got access to the growth and to the asset. You can take the money out without paying any penalty. I think it's better to have it in my pocket, but that's because I know about me. I will invest it. The self-employed thing, I think, when you're not sure about when your income is going to come in, and I think someone else had a question about this, when you've got fluctuating income.
What about the case of, okay, sorry, go on with that, but there's also case I'm thinking about is guaranteed income, quite good income, but self-employed.
Okay, so you've got good income,
Yeah.
and it's regular and reliable,
Yeah.
and you're self-employed. Okay, so most advisors will tell you you need to put some money aside for super, because it's for your nest egg, for when you can no longer earn money. So whether you think that's important to you or whether you can buy assets that will do the same thing for you and have access to them now is the question. Okay? If you know you would take that money and you would spend it and there won't be anything for the future, then I would say, yes, please put it in super, because then you can't get to it and you can't cock it up, right? But for most people, that's not what happens. When they're thinking about it deliberately and they go, no, I'm going to take that money and I'm going to invest it in something, and then you've got access to it. So I think the self-employed thing actually doesn't really matter. It's more a question about whether you're going to actively invest it and how disciplined you are about it.
Would you do what rate would you say at? Would you do like a little bit of soup, like say you have the same kind of mindset as you, and you're like, yeah, I'll do the right things with it. Would you still put like a small portion aside?
You could. I'm an all or nothing kind of
Or just,
person.
like,
You could.
because legally you can not bother if you want. Hey?
That's right, you don't have to. There's no obligation when you're self-employed. Look, personally, it's just never something that I have thought. I know that I will take all the money and do better stuff with it.
Yeah.
There's this kind of idea of dilution. Are you better off putting all your eggs in one basket? You know, like that kind of thing, or do you have a variety of options? I guess I'm a bit of a fatalist. I don't know if I'm going to make it to 65. I want the money now, right? So, not for any, like, I hope I'll make it to 65. I haven't got any reason to think I won't. But I would much rather have the money now. It's just a decision that you've got to make for yourself. And you can do it, but if you said to yourself, well, I'm going to put, say, 10% of this over here, of these savings into the super, and then 90% I'm going to invest elsewhere. Look, you're not going to go wrong, are you? You're not going to lose. You've got a little bit of an incentive. But are you better off owning the assets outright when you're younger, so that they pay you when you're younger, so that work becomes a choice when you're younger instead of having to work till your 70s, because you can't get to the money because the government's locked it up. And let's face it, we don't know what the government's going to do. We don't know what superannuation age they're going to set. We don't know what tax rate they're going to set. We don't know whether they're going to change the rules completely. And they can when it's government controlled. They can change the rules. In Singapore recently, they increased the retirement age by 10 years in one fell swoop. They went from 50 to 60. So you can imagine all the people who are 49 going like, I'm about to retire. Oh, no, you're not. You've got another 11 years of working. Now, I don't think that would happen in Australia because they get voted out. But it can happen because the government controls superannuation rules. So who knows what would happen. I personally prefer to have control. But I'm a bit pessimistic and fatalistic about this kind of stuff.
Brother-in-law lost half of his superannuation in the 90s in the recession.
Yeah, there's some terrible stories like that where it's just if you were planning.
Regulate it now. That's why the
Yeah.
government stepped in and.
Exactly. Yes, that's kind of interesting.
It's your money, like it's your super, but you can't get it until you retire.
Well, you know the reason why they're doing that, right? They don't want to pay a pension anymore. They don't want to have to keep paying a pension, so they have to know that you've saved. They have to. Otherwise, they have to have a pension, because otherwise we'll all be homeless. Well, not all of us. We're all going to be fine. Yeah, exactly. So that's why they regulate it so heavily. Also, you can imagine there's an entire superannuation industry who's made something like $30 billion off fees of your superannuation in the last 20 odd years. It's a pretty big industry. Lots of money. Lots of incentive for them. All right, that was all the content that I had planned to go through. I'll just go on to the next screen. If you guys want to take a photo of this URL with your phones, it's the notes. So you don't need to enter an email or anything like that. You just need to go and click on there, and it's a PDF. And that is these few pages of notes. Now in here is a very short summary of what I've talked about tonight. Okay, so it's the dot point version of what I've said. Okay, there's also some extra reading if you want to read it. So you'll see in these little grey boxes on there, detailed blogs. Some of them are like 5,000 words with massive calculations in them. So if you're keen on investment property, go and read those, because I do a lot of property ones. Please go and read the ones that you're interested in. Download the notes. You don't need to enter your email address. Put them wherever you'd like to keep them. Refer to them, okay? Everyone got that written down or taken a photo?
Yeah.
All sorted, okay, very good.